Tree and this is Stitchless TV. Now today I'm going to show you how to make this cardigan without a pattern and mainly sewn on our overlocker. Now if you want me to show you how to trace off a pattern or how to copy an existing garment, I can do that in another video, but for this cardigan I'll roughly show you what I did. Now when I do this sort of thing, you can do it with everything, but if you want it just to be really easy, so I didn't even make a paper pattern, then do it with simple shaped things, and using a knit or a stretchy fabric as well helps. So whenever I do this sort of thing, I want to know what the shape and the size of the back is. So for her cardigan, so I roughly laid it on some fabric to a fold, roughly matched up the neck. Now when you do this sort of thing, and if you're using stretch fabric, you don't want to stretch it too much when you're laying it out, and that goes for the top fabric and the under fabric. Because it's a knitted fabric that I'm using, I know I'm not going to do a huge seam allowance, and I'm probably going to do it all or most of it on the overlocker. So I've laid it all out. Now I'm going to be adding my own ribbed collar, so when I laid on the collar I just trimmed back a little bit of a seam allowance back, because I know that by the time I add the collar on it's going to come up to the same height. Now again, because it's stretchy fabric, there's loads of room for changing things around. So then when you've got your back piece that will be cut to a fold, it makes it really easy to then cut your front piece. Now this is on the cardigan that we're doing today. It won't be the same for all other things, yeah? So all I did was I laid my back piece on some fabric to a fold, exactly the same size. I cut it out, and then I folded back the amount that I wanted it to be for the V, and then trimmed that back. And then because I'm having an opening at the front, I cut it down that fold. Now the reason that I was able to do it like this, even though it's a cardigan that will overlap a little bit, it's because for my button stand, I've cut out a long strip. Now I'm not measuring this strip to any particular measurement. I'm going to see how it goes when I put it on. Now in the area where the button stand will be, I will need to iron on some sort of stabiliser or interfacing, so that when I do the buttonholes on there, it doesn't all stretch and go all crazy. So that's the button stand. It's just a great big long length, and I don't know how long it's going to be. So we've got our front, our back, and then obviously we need the two sleeves. So for the sleeves, and on this particular cardigan, which is why I've chosen it, there isn't a particular front and back, but there is a bit of shape on the sleeve. So all I did was this: I folded my fabric. So I've got two sleeves here. You would do it one at a time, especially when you've got stripes. It's easier to keep track. So I got my sleeve roughly. I found what the shape of it is, so that you can sort of see that. So I've got that to a fold. It's got it laid out all nicely. I've got that to a fold. I've added a little bit of a seam allowance. I've seen that the stretch is similar. I've got a bit of a shape going on here for the sleeve, put a notch at the top. So that's the sleeve. This, I repeat again, it's easy, the copying of it, because this is a knitted fabric that's got about that much sort of stretch and drape, and I've chosen, although it's different, it has a similar weight and a similar amount of stretch. Now it will be handy to have an iron because it will be good for moulding the neckband and button stand. Also to iron on the interfacing, which we're having just in this section of the button stand. But other than that, because I want to show off how you can make things really quickly with a 4-thread overlocker, we're mainly going to make it on this. I've just folded my button stand and neckband in half and pressed it. So the first thing that we sew is we open up the back piece, because it was cut to a fold, and we put one of the front pieces right sides together, and we're focusing on the shoulder bit. I can put the other one on as well so you can see what's going on. And where we're going to sew is along here and along here. Now you can very successfully do it with a zigzag stitch. Just come a little bit away from the edge and either use a lightning stitch or a smallish zigzag stitch. And then you can always trim it back a little bit and then go over it again. But you use a zigzag because you want it to stretch. But today we're using the overlocker. Now when you begin on the overlocker, if you haven't used one before, you can either drive on or you can lift up the foot as you would with a sewing machine and drop the foot so it grabs it. Now I find when I'm sewing knitted fabric, it's better not to drive on because it sort of stretches it. Now as it sews, it trims it off as well, but I could drop the cutter if I wanted to and sew without that. Now I always leave a long thread because I hate threading them. Oh. So that's basically that shoulder seam sorted. So do the same on the other side. Right, I want you to see that when you've done that, look, it looks really good. Now I still press like I would with normal dressmaking, so I press that towards the back. Now, whilst it's still in this sort of two-dimensional way, and before I start attaching the neck, I mean you do it in the order that you want, but I think I'm going to attach the sleeves. Now because I don't have a front and a back for my sleeves, it does make it easier. But I did put a notch for the centre where it meets the shoulder, just because, you know me, I like my notches. So that's the main thing I'm going to match up there. Now using pins with overlockers isn't fantastic actually, but I am going to put a pin in there, and then I want a pin where it's going to finish with a slight overlap because it goes at an angle, and then I'm going to have a look at what I've got, and then I'll probably put a pin that falls somewhere in the middle. Just so I can see how the sleeve fits. Okay, so did that make sense? Right. So look, that's the armhole, that's our sleeve. We matched up the notch, flipped everything over, put a pin where the centre shoulder bit was, a pin at the end, and then filled a few pins in the middle. And then do the same for the bit that goes towards the back. So I'm lining up the side seam of the cardigan with the side seam of the sleeve, the underseam of the sleeve, and I'm going to put a pin in there. You want to get rid of those pins as you go along and long before you get anywhere near them. Now I'm going to lift up the foot again because I feel like I have more control, and as I sew I'm making sure that everything is being trapped. So I'm approaching that pin, I want to get it off soon. I'm making sure everything is lined up. So if I trim off a little bit, I can be sure I'm capturing everything. Take off my pin, feel and look, make sure everything is flat and lined up. Now I've got a big notch there, so I do need to be careful to get it. So basically you just keep doing that, checking everything's flat and making your way around until you get to the other end. Before I start doing it on the other side, I wanted you to just see how effective it is. Now I haven't even pressed this, but look. So I know it looks kind of shop bought, which is good and bad, but this is for my teenager, and unfortunately, I don't know, she likes that shop bought look. So do it on your other shoulder, your other armhole. So I want you to see how it takes shape very quickly with the overlocker. It really does. So we've done the shoulder seams. We've attached the sleeves on. We have not done the side seams because I like to work in 2D for as long as possible. I think it's better for beginners. Anyway, so look, you can see it's starting to take shape and it's starting to look like a cardigan. Now for our long neckband stroke button stand, I like to fold it in half. It's already been pressed and folded in half with the right side on the outside. Okay, I found the middle of it and put a notch there, and I've put a notch on the back of the neck. I've just got to go in front for a moment so you can have a look. And basically what's going to happen is that we will attach it right sides together. So we'll attach it right sides together and it will be overlocked. So this is the back neck. This is where it goes down to a V. Okay, shoulders, sleeve, back piece. All right. Now I want to find the middle of my band. Now because I've got this stripe thing going on, I want to make sure I've got it the right way round. So if I want it to look like that, then I need to flop it over right sides together. Now the very first thing I'm going to do is match up that centre back notch. Now I don't think, or do I? Yeah, okay, so I want just a little bit of stretch going on around that neck there so that it lays flat when it's the other way. So I'm not stretching the one underneath, not at all, but I am stretching this top one just a little bit and putting a pin in. And then I'm putting my finger where that pin is and I'm just stretching it just a little bit to get it around the bend there and putting a pin on there. Now I might need one more tiny little stretch just to get me a bit around the bend there. Not much, it's not really, it's more easing than stretching. And then to get me down the V, I don't want to do any stretching because that will just lay flat. Now, I think I'm going to take it maybe 3 centimetres, a large inch, inch and a half, away from where it suddenly goes down from the V. So that's there, I'll stop about there. Now, if I just see where that sort of junction is of the V, and put another pin in there. Wow, so much for not using pins, we're using lots of pins today. I want to just take it down without any stretching and see how far it needs to go down here, bearing in mind I'm going to have this much of a hem. So I want it to stop around there. So I'm then going to be very brave, and including a small seam allowance, I'm going to just trim that like that. Because what's going to happen there is they're going to be sewn together. I'll pop a pin on so you can see. They're going to be sewn together, right sides together. Okay, plopped out like that, so that when it's like this, except it will be straight, when it's like this, that will be the bottom of the button stand and it will be very nice and neat. But before we do that, leave this for the moment and start pinning down the other side and stop in the same kind of location. Now, before I move on and do anything else, in this button stand area, i.e. where I'm going to be doing my buttonholes, I need to get some iron-on interfacing into there. So I'm just going to undo one of those pins so I can access it. So once you know how far up, let's have a look. So we're going to there, that's going to go down there. You can give yourself a little notch there. Yeah, don't do your notches too big on this. So you can see where you're going to be ironing on your interfacing. So mine's going to go in there. So I'll cut that. And do the same on the other side as well. So iron that on in there and then iron it closed again. Don't stretch anything. And do that on the other side. Okay, so I've ironed on that interfacing just onto one layer and then I've pressed it closed again. So that means that this no longer has any stretch, but it is the button stand and it's okay, but everything else has got stretch. So line everything up and make sure it's the right length. And then, before we do the next stage, you need to open out this stuff, the button stand, put a pin in it. Okay, so that's right sides together, yeah? So, right sides together, folding it down the fold, making sure it's straight, putting a pin in it. And either with a sewing machine or an overlocker, but make sure you capture it all, but don't chew up the pin. You're going to sew straight across there to close it off. I sort of feel like I should be using a sewing machine for this, but let's see if we can do it on the overlocker. So when you've got it in position, put it in there. Right, everything has to line up perfectly and make sure I've caught it all. So you either do that with the sewing machine, I'll leave a long thread actually, with the sewing machine or with the overlocker, but then when you turn it the right way round, oh look, like that. So do it on the other side too. When you've done that, start pinning it back on again. So I always like to know where I'm going first. So I'm going to be hemming that like that. So that's where it needs to stop. It needs to stop at my hem line. And I'll put a pin in there. And then I'm going to go backwards. So remember, it hasn't got any stretch in it anymore. So I'm going to take it up to the point at which the V stops, put a pin in there, and then make all of this stuff good here. So this now is the V, where the V happens, yeah? So there's a slight turning around the bend to go up into the V. Right. So I'm going to do that side too. Now, you know, if you're very experienced with the overlocker, you can probably just overlock, making sure you're trapping everything, making sure everything's all like eased where it's meant to be eased. Go all the way round and stop down the other end. Now, if you are not very experienced, can you please be careful and use a medium, large size zigzag stitch and your sewing machine to hold this all in place first, going around, and then use your overlocker. Right, so I am not taking my own advice and stay stitching it first. So if it goes wrong, at least you know what could go wrong and that you'll make sure that you do. So I've got it all in position. I'm trimming off just a little bit as I go. There's no sort of easing, stretching coming up the button stand. I'm slightly regretting that I didn't sew it first. But let's see how it goes. So this is the point where the V happens. Oh, Jesus, that's really bad. Always remove your pins before you get to your pins. So I'm making sure all the edges are lined up. And I think you should know, because I didn't stay stitch it first with the sewing machine, I am feeling a bit anxious about it. Right, so now it's around the neck. There is a bit of, I don't know if you call it stretching, it's sort of easing, yeah, but we've got all the pins in place, so we know how much to do it by. So I'm at the back of the neck now, where the back notches were. I'm going to take my pin off. Now, if all your edges are not lined up, then you're going to end up with a hole. And that isn't the end of the world. You can go over it with the sewing machine, I'd say, rather than the overlocker, because it can look messy. Anyway, I want to stop talking now because I want to concentrate coming down on the other side. So for this next bit, you really do need an iron, and it's what you use to go from this, okay, so that's what we've just sewn, but with an iron you're able to ease it around the bend like this, because it needs to stretch there. It can't stretch here because we've got the interfacing in there in preparation for buttons and buttonholes, but it can stretch here, can't it, to get it around there, and then this does not stretch. So I'll quickly show you that with the iron, but that's the other side if you want to see it. So it is all very neat, and look, it's very neat going up around the neck. The seam allowance of which there isn't much, gets pressed towards the cardigan. All right, that's the first thing. This is the bit that does not stretch. Yep, I'm going straight on top without a cloth or anything. Now find the point where it suddenly changes direction to go into the V. So I would say that that's about there. So that is the bit that I need to just stretch the outer edge a little bit. Look, you can see it wants to sort of go that way, but you have to get it at the right point or it looks odd. See? So that's just there, isn't it? So just on that edge, a bit of steam and a bit of pressing. This V does not stretch, but I need to move down. So look. So these knitted fabrics, particularly when they're wool, you can do quite a lot of manipulating with them. Now the next important thing, I talk more about this in my how to sew a t-shirt, ribbed, put a neck on. You've got to have it in the shape that it's going to be. Don't you dare open it out to a straight line, because if you do that, you're going to end up with a ripply neck. So I'm still pushing the seam allowance away and pressing it. Now, if this was t-shirt fabric, I might actually go over it with a twin needle just to make sure it stays in place for like after washes and all the rest of it. But I don't want to do it for this. I want it to have that nice clean edge. Right, I'll show you what it looks like when it's on the stand. So that is kind of easy, isn't it? And we are nearly done. All we have to do is match up the armhole, overlock coming up and coming down the side seam. Or remember, you can kind of do it with a zigzag stitch on a sewing machine. And then what happens is we hem it so it's in line, properly, in line with the button stand, and hem the cuffs, and that's it. It's really good, isn't it? So it's hard for me to fit it on here, but let's just work on this side. So that's your front, that's your back, that's your sleeve. I want you to bring your fabric right sides together, so you're putting your back with your front along the side seam, and you're just going to put a pin where the armpit is, making sure it's perfectly lined up. Then put a pin where the hem is, and then see where the middle lines up and put a pin in there. Now, you're probably wondering, what's going on? Tree, what's happened? All these pins. So the reason why is because you can't kind of use notches so effectively with knitted stretch fabric, because they just stretch out of place, or they could cause a ladder. So you can use them a little bit, but not so much as you do with woven fabrics. So I didn't say, but I'm pinning down the sleeve seam. I'll pin it at the end. Actually, do you know what? Okay, I'll pin it there. Before I get to the end, it's going to be a lot easier, I think, for me to overlock the cuff, the end of the sleeve, before I close it off. So I'm going to do that to both cuffs, sleeve. So once you've done that, you can start sewing up the side seams. Now, because we've got it all pinned, I can start at the waist, I suppose. Now it's up to you if you want to trim off a little bit as you go. but it does ensure that you've caught the bottom one and the top one. So I'll be coming around this armpit in a minute where there might be a bit of bulk, so let's see. Okay, that seemed fine. And you might want to reinforce that afterwards with the sewing machine using a zigzag stitch. I'm now coming down the sleeve. So before I get to the hem, I'm going to line up the hem, and I want to leave a long thread on this for now. So I had to charge up my camera, and whilst charging up my camera, I did do the buttonholes at the front. Now if you feel cheated, go and watch my video on how to sew buttonholes, and there are tricks there that you can use and sort of problem solving things. I did do that. I haven't sewn the buttons on. I did overlock the bottom, and I have just hemmed one of the sleeves. Now I would usually do a twin needle on the hem, but I need to finish soon, and yeah, so what I've done is a kind of wide zigzag stitch, and I'm going to show you how I do the hem on the other sleeve, and then how we finish off the hem here, and then we're done. Right, so I have got my sewing machine out now, and I do want to put it on a zigzag and mess around with it. So I don't want it too zigzaggy. I've got it down to about 1.5, and I've put the stitch size up to 3.5, but you need to play around with it because all the machines are going to be different. Now because we're going to be using hemming the sleeve, I want to take that part of the machine off because it will make my hemming sleeve job easier. So the reason why we took that plate off is because we can then do this, and it makes it a lot easier to sew. Now like I said, if you're not doing twin needle, then you do need to have a slight, very slight zigzag in your stitch, and not too small. Not too small a stitch as well. So work your way around. Now if you do want to do twin needle, go and watch how to do twin needle to see how to set it up. Now I'm trying to stay on the off-white because my thread is off-white. But you can't really see it that well, but there's just a slight zigzag in my stitch. And then I'm just going to go backwards and forwards to close it off. So that's the sleeve hemmed. And now you've got to do this. This is why we've left this step. Okay, you're going to fold in your button stand, and you're going to fold up your hem to wherever it was supposed to be, and then pin it or whatever you want to do, and stitch up the exact same seam allowances where your overlock stitch finished. And do it on the other side as well. So look, I've folded it in, and then I've turned it up to whatever my seam allowance is meant to be. It doesn't really matter if I pin it on the top or the bottom. And so I'm going to just sew up there. Right, so when you've sewn that, press up your hem before you sew it. So I will just show you that, look, that didn't line up. Now I would have just cheated it at the bottom, but I can't because of the stripes. It means more to me to have the stripes in line than it does that little step. So all we need to do now is stitch this hem. So you can either do it in that kind of wide, not too small a stitch, zigzag stitch, or you can do a twin needle, or you might even just be able to go straight if you have a very relaxed cardigan that's not going to be subject to any stretching. Now I'm a bit of a stickler for my threads matching, and I can't possibly stitch on top of this with an off-white thread. So I'm having off-white thread underneath, and I'm going to have pink on the top, so I've got to go and change my thread. So look, done the hem. I've actually sewn the buttons on now, but look, it really is a proper cardigan. Look at that. Now I really do want to add these pockets, but I haven't got time to show you. They're only like little pockets, but, well, I haven't got time to show you at all, sorry. We've got plenty of tutorials on how to sew pockets. Obviously it's going to be a bit different with them being knitted fabric, but surely that's really amazing. I think it looks like a Pringle cardigan. So that is quite good, isn't it? I mean, I think it's quite a kind of professional, maybe mass-produced professional finish. Let's look at the back. Okay, so the back's all good as well. Sleeves are good. Cuffs are good. Now, it was very hard for me to make such a plain cardigan, but my daughter isn't really particularly adventurous. But with the techniques that I've shown you today, I'm sure you can figure out that you could do a frill that gets caught in this shoulder seam here. You could do a gathered, big balloony sleeve, which I think I might have to do at some point. There are all sorts of things that you could do with this, but I still think it's going to be nice with pockets, isn't it? Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you want to see about sewing with twin needle, go and watch our tutorial on how to sew with a twin needle. And if you want to see about the buttonholes, go and watch the tutorial on how to sew buttonholes. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again really soon. Bye.